Most people, even deeply religious ones, see God as something separate, somewhere out there, higher, deeper, inside, but still as an object. There is me and there is God. There is the human and there is a higher power. There is the observer and there is what is observed. This way of seeing feels natural, but it is exactly this perception that mystical traditions call a sense of separation. Separation is not a mistake, it is not a sin, it is simply a certain mode of perception. It exists only when there is a center that experiences itself as a separate me. As long as there is someone who looks at God, there is inevitably distance. And that distance is one of the greatest obstacles on the path of self-recognition. Because anything you can think about, imagine, or point to is not God. God is that from which you are looking. It is important to name this clearly. What religious language has called God is called consciousness in philosophical and contemplative language. Not as an idea, not as a brain function, and not as a personal experience. This is not about thoughts, not about attention, not about a state of mind. Consciousness is not part of experience. It is that in which experience appears at all. Consciousness is the very ground of perception. Thoughts appear in consciousness. Sensations appear in consciousness. Even the sense of I am appears in consciousness. Consciousness is not something you experience. It is what makes any experience possible. It is that from which thoughts, sensations, images, beliefs, and even doubt arise. Consciousness does not belong to the person. The person appears within it. Consciousness itself does not come and go. It is deeper than belief, images, and concepts. The pure ground before awareness divides into subject and object. God cannot be an object of awareness. If God were an object, he would be limited, defined, contained within consciousness. But then who would be the one perceiving that object? Objects appear in awareness, but God is not inside awareness as one thing among others. God is the ground that makes awareness itself possible. That is why it cannot be an object. It cannot be seen from the outside. It cannot be imagined, because the very act of seeing already happens within it. This is why attachment to any image of God, even sacred ones, prevents the knowing of God. Every image turns God into something finite. True knowing begins when the mind releases its grip on images and remains in the quiet clarity that comes before thought. Here, awareness does not perceive God. It is God, because the deepest level of consciousness and the divine ground are not two separate realities. The true meaning of what religious language calls God is not an object we perceive, imagine, or think about. God is the very ground of awareness. God is not what consciousness knows. God is what consciousness is before it knows anything. That is why God cannot be found somewhere outside. It can only be discovered within by becoming aware of this ground itself. Beneath personality, memory, emotions, and identity, there is a deeper layer untouched by time and change. This ground is not created, not personal, not belonging to individual I. It is the same ground as the being of God itself. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a precise description of how consciousness recognizes its own source. What is being said here may sound radical, like a philosophical position, like a modern reinterpretation, But it is not a new idea. If one looks not at the outer forms of religion, but at their mystical core, the answers to the questions where is God, where is truth, where is the absolute, again and again point not to an object, but to the ground. In Christian mysticism, it is said that God cannot be grasped through images. Any image is already not God. God is not among things. He cannot be thought of as something that exists separately. In Advaita Vedanta, this is stated directly. Atman, the inner self, is not different from Brahman, the source of everything. Separation appears only when consciousness identifies with form and personality. In Mahayana Buddhism, the teaching of emptiness points to the absence of inherent existence. No phenomenon exists on its own, and if there are no inherently existing objects, there can be no separate subject standing opposite to the Absolute. Zen goes even further. It abandons explanations and points directly. Truth is not transmitted through words. It is recognized when seeking stops and the mind no longer turns it into an object. In the Dzogchen tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, this recognition is called recognizing the nature of mind, not creating a special state, but recognizing what has always been present as awareness itself. Different languages, different words, different contexts, but the movement is the same. In all these traditions, the Absolute is not somewhere else. It does not stand opposite the human being. It is not something to look at. It is that from which all looking is possible. When awareness turns inward, beyond thoughts and self-images, it encounters stillness. Not an empty stillness, but one that is self-illuminating. In this stillness, there is no difference between the knower and the known. Awareness does not experience God. It awakens to the fact that its deepest nature has always been divine. By letting go of God, it finds God. This is not a rejection of the divine, it is a rejection of false ideas about God. The God that must be let go of is the God we imagine, conceptualize, and try to hold on to. Only when the image of God dies does the true God appear, not as an object, but as the very ground of awareness. True liberation comes through non-attachment, not through moral effort or accumulating belief. Non-attachment means letting go of every identity, every image, even the image of oneself as a seeker. When there is nothing left to hold on to, awareness is revealed in its own source. And in this nakedness, it is discovered that there was never any separation from God. The seeker and the sought dissolve into one simple presence. God is not something consciousness arrives at. God is what consciousness already is before it reaches for anything. This is not saying that God does not exist. It is saying that God cannot be an object of perception, just as the ground of perception itself cannot be perceived as an object. This is not a devaluation of religion. Religious forms, images, and rituals do not become false. They become what they were always meant to be, pointers, ways of speaking about what cannot be expressed directly. This is also not a psychological state, not a special experience, not peace, not love, not an expanded state of consciousness. Every state comes and goes. What is being pointed to does not come and go. And most importantly, this is not the idea I am God at the level of personality. The personality does not become the absolute. The individual me does not turn into something higher. This is not the elevation of ego, but the loss of its central position. Nothing needs to be claimed. Nothing needs to be declared as me. Nothing needs to become a new identity. What is being pointed to does not give power to the personality. It removes it from the center. This is not belief, not theology, not another teaching. It is a direct inquiry into awareness itself. Truth is recognized not through belief, not through reasoning, and not through symbols, but through direct recognition of reality. When searching outside stops, when grasping of inner images ends, and what remains is the place where recognition itself arises, there it is discovered that there is no observer and no observed. There is only quiet clarity in which everything appears. This is it. This is God.